Hey, good evening. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming out. My name is Beandrea July. I'm a film programmer here at UCLA Film and Television Archive. And I want to welcome you here to the Billy Wilder Theater, which is the home of all of our public programs. Curious, how many of you, this is your first time coming to an archive film screening? Wow, okay, a lot. And then I do see some regulars as well. So we're happy you're all here. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our archive talk with Professor Ellen C. Scott and our screening of No Way Out, as well as Daydream Therapy. Archive Talks pairs leading historians and scholars with screenings of the moving image media that is the focus of their writing and research. And this is about introducing audiences to new insights, interpretations, and contexts for the films and the media being screened. We want to thank our community partners, UCLA School of Film, Theater, Film, and Television. And all of our screenings, as well as tonight's, are generously supported by an anonymous donor and our partners here at the Hammer Museum. Also want to say thanks to the wonderful archive staff, including our theater manager, Lauren Brown, our projectionist, Alex Blevins, and our programming coordinator, Nicole Osedu, as well as our student theater staff that are here tonight. Let's give them all a little round of applause. I also just want to highlight some of the things coming up this week at our next series. We've got a 2-day program with a director named Michelle Parkerson on Friday and Saturday. It's going to be showing 6 of her films released from 1980 to all the way through 2021. And my personal favorite is the documentary about Audre Lorde called A Litany for Survival, which documents her extraordinary work and some of the last years of her life. And also on that weekend, the Sunday, we're going to do Gay Girls Writing Club, which was an underground sensation in the pre-Stonewall Southern California gay rights movement. And they're known for producing these sort of like campy short film satires of popular movies. So it's a real campy good time. And yeah, so now I want to move towards what we're doing tonight. So we're going to start with the short that's made by a TFT alum. It was actually one of his first projects as an MFA student here years ago, and it was filmed in Marina Del Rey in the Burton Chase Park. This is Daydream Therapy from 1997. The runtime is 8 minutes. I always like to let people know runtime because I know bathroom coordination is an issue sometimes. And then this short, I wanted to pair because I think it goes nicely with No Way Out because it's sort of like 20, it's almost 30 years later. So there's like more space for, more authentic reaction to racism than there was, allowed to be in No Way Out. But we'll get into that. So it basically is about the fantasy life of a hotel worker whose daydreams and quiet vengeance provide an escape from workplace strife. And it has a great musical score with some Nina Simone and Archie Shepp. And then moving to No Way Out, I'm just going to share with you our program notes written by my colleague Mark Quigley, because I think they're really good and they give some great context. So armed with limited stage experience, including serving as an understudy in the touring company of Anna Lucasta, and an Army Signal Corps short on his resume, Sidney Poitier answered an atypical open call for 1949. And the call was 20th Century Fox was to cast numerous Black actors in key parts for a major motion picture. After several competitive auditions and screen tests, director Joseph Mankiewicz personally selected Poitier from a group of finalists. The actor's subsequent feature film debut in No Way Out would prove to be career-defining. His mature performance as a young doctor breaking down racial barriers under hostile circumstances embodies the combination of emotional intensity and grace that would become his hallmark in films such as A Raisin in the Sun and In the Heat of the Night. It's often cited as opening the door to the social drama film genre that emerged in the 1950s. No Way Out was controversial upon release for its graphic exploration of racial violence and what Mankiewicz described as the, quote, absolute blood and guts of Negro hating, end quote. The film's progressive depiction of an African American community mounting a preemptive strike in the face of an attack by racist mobs prompted censors in several states to delete such scenes on the grounds that they were, quote, too provocative and, quote, might incite violence. The NAACP, which protested the film's explicit use of racial epithets, condemned the deletion of the self-defense scenes, arguing that with the cuts, the film's original message was hopelessly lost. And I'm going to formally introduce Ellen C. Scott later, but she wants to say a few words introducing the film as well, and then we'll go to the screening. So welcome, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Beandrea, and it's great to be here. I just wanted to put the film a little bit in the context of the racial problem film cycle that was happening at this time. It included films like Lost Boundaries, where Hollywood was really trying to think about these themes. As with many film cycles, the idea was in part to make money off of these themes. So there's a real question around some of the values behind the films and how they're struggling to express both content that will be acceptable to white racists and to Black audiences potentially. I think this film takes some risks that other films in the series or in that cycle did not, including the way that the casting works, and the ensemble cast in particular works to kind of give space for Black community life to be shown in a different way. And of course, the acting of Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis, as you'll see, is really important in this film. I do want to just offer also a bit of a trigger warning here from the standpoint of the number of times the N-word is used in this film. It's important to note that going in, and also to note that this is a real break with the studio policy around the N-word, as we'll talk about after the film. But during this time, studios increasingly were using the N-word to characterize white racist people in a negative way. Before that, they tried to basically repress it, the use of the N-word. The overuse here, we can talk about what that means and what that's doing, and what maybe isn't being said or isn't being shown, with the N-word kind of standing in for racism writ large. So there's both the use of the N-word and many other racial epithets. I think it's used 32 times in this film. So just be prepared for that, and we can talk more about what it meant afterwards. So thanks for coming.
I just want to say really quickly that the runtime for this is 106 minutes for No Way Out. So we have Daydream Therapy, 8 minutes, then No Way Out, 106 minutes. Enjoy the films. Usually with these archive talks, our invited academic gives kind of a talk at the podium, but Ellen, in her great wisdom, wanted to do more of a Q&A and leave time for audience questions. I want to first just tell you a little bit about Ellen. So this is Professor Ellen C. Scott. She specializes in media history, African American cultural history, film and media theory, as well as American film history, sound theory, and the history of censorship and cultural studies. Her research focuses on the cultural meanings and reverberations of film in African American communities, and more broadly, the relationship of media to the struggle for racial justice and equality. And tonight we're going to be talking about her book. She's the author of Cinema Civil Rights, which was actually published 10 years ago this year by Rutgers University Press in 2015. And she's currently working on 2 projects, one examining the history of slavery on the American screen and another on the history of classical Hollywood era Black women film critics. So thanks for being with us, Ellen.
Glad to be here.
Yes. I mean, let's just start with initial feelings. I know you've told me earlier that you've seen this film at least 24 times. So seeing it again tonight, what kind of stuck to you? What are your kind of impressions right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the film, I always thought of it very much in terms of its racial politics, and in terms of representations of African Americans, but there's a way in which you could read this film as actually much more about white working class people, in a sense, if we see Edie as the center of focalization for the film. I also was really struck tonight just by the noir elements of it in terms of the dialogue and in terms of, those sequences of chiaroscuro, light and darkness. And so it really, I think, borrows from those themes. And those are things I noticed tonight. But it's a very heavy film in a lot of ways. So
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think the parts about there's something about it that feels very timely, especially in what you said about reading it as more being about like the white working class than it is about race. And you can definitely feel that push and pull between like the studio reaching out to white people or white racists, as you said in your introduction, and still wanting somehow black people to feel like they want to go see the film. Like you can feel like even just in that conversation with in the kitchen with the black woman who's the maid, and then Edie, and then the white doctor, like they were all having like different conversations.
yeah, no, and I think this film really, he's the producer Daryl F. Zanuck was really bringing together a number of different acting and cinema traditions. So I think first just to notice the American Negro Theater and the importance of the American Negro Theater for this particular production, that they auditioned a whole number of people from the American Negro Theater, which is a Harlem-based theater that was run by Frederick O'Neill and Abram Hill out of they were actually performing out of the Schomburg's Little Theater in the basement there. Their most famous play being Anna Lucasta, that went to Broadway. And in some ways, I think maybe it was Anna Lucasta going to Broadway that in some ways made a production like this in Hollywood kind of thinkable. It's also important to note that Philip Jordan, who was one of the screenwriters on this, was one of the writers of Anna Lucasta. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there were 6 versions of the script, right?
Yes.
And he wrote 1 of them.
Yeah.
7, yes. Mankiewicz wrote 1. The more it got closer to production. But I wanted to ask you, just back up and say, like, so in your book, you talk a lot about the Production Code Administration, which at that time, around the time this film was released, was exerting a lot of power over what actually made it to the theater from the cuts of films. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of that climate. Well, what is the Production Code Administration, and then what's the climate into which No Way Out is being released?
Yeah. So the Production Code Administration was maybe better known as the Breen Office, and the Hayes. They represented the Hayes Code. And I think one of the things they're trying to do essentially, they have 2 functions, right? They're there to stave off outside censorship, but they're also there to help producers to create films within a rubric that's going to be acceptable to outside pressure groups, et cetera. And so they're really, on the one hand, censors. There's certain issues like representation of sexuality, queer sexuality on screen that really almost, they had a lot of trouble getting through in classical Hollywood era. But then there are other areas where they really mostly helped producers to develop a rubric for talking about them. So I think this film is interesting because of like kind of what it isn't able to say directly, but it says through various like Easter eggs or signifiers throughout the film. I think particularly about that moment with the Navy flare gun, which, is sort of a reference potentially to World War II when the Detroit riots happened, and there were riots in New York as well, which also kind of could be a reference to the nuclear age. But there's these sort of interesting signifiers throughout the film that I think do some work that maybe couldn't be done on the surface of the film. This film actually had a really slim PCA file, partly, I think, because Zanuck was doing so much work on the front end as producer, trying to figure out how to make something that would be acceptable, as he said, in white cities like Detroit. So this is really not figuring racism as a Southern problem, but as a deeply American problem. And I think that he's trying to do that, particularly through the balance of discourse, through centering things through Edie. But also, I mean, we really should talk about the quote unquote riot scenes, because those, there's really no violence. It's completely bloodless. A lot of the energy and the atmosphere of violence is kind of projected into the beating of objects. The whole thing takes place in a junkyard, so there's no destruction of property, right? So there are ways in which Zanuck has created this where he can signify riot, but without saying it or really showing it. And I think in particular, you notice this when Lefty's talking about it in the elevator. It's like, does he ever say like violence or riot? I mean, there's a way in which it's just signified indirectly, which actually works really nicely with the ways noirs talk anyway, which is indirect, right? And double entendre, but you know what they mean.
Right. Yeah, it's like you kind of see and hear what you want to hear from the dialogue. It's written in such a way that really anybody can come to it and project whatever they want onto it. That's why I love seeing it with you all, because it was great to hear your responses. Some of them were mine as well during the movie, because I think that moment where he said, maybe we'll find out what happened to your brain to, Biddle's character was an interesting response. You mentioned Daryl Zanuck a few times, and I just want to draw him out a little bit. Like, who was he? Why was he important to this film and to specifically this era?
He's so important. He's the head of 20th Century Fox in terms of a production head there. And he's also starts at Warner Brothers, so he really has that stolen from the headlines kind of approach to looking at American life. So he has, a number of films. I think this film is really interesting because of the sound in a way too. It has that sort of like no soundtrack realist approach to it. Which is actually sort of striking when you think about most Hollywood films, which have like elaborate scores. Here we get these moments of Duke Ellington, but anyhow, and back to Zanuck. I think was known as a producer who was really meticulous in terms of everything that came out under his name, but particularly this was one of his own personal productions. So he put a lot of attention into every element of it. The famous memos from Darryl F. Zanuck were these, missives that he wrote to various screenwriters before he fired them, or sort of about how the screenplay should be going. He was just one of those producers who would go on set and get really involved. So I think he was really, we see in his memos, he actually says, I want to go into a Black home. I want to see what that's like. Maybe he has a mother, maybe he has a sister. So in a way, he opened up space for that. But I really do want to suggest that a lot of that may have been coming out of what already existed in terms of Black cultural production through the the American Negro Theater. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's just he had green lighting power, so
right.
He kind of inserted himself and/or, took the lead there. You talk about in your book, Cinema Civil Rights, which I think is available for sale, or at the very least, you can get it from the UCLA library. You talk about how this classical Hollywood period, it articulated kind of a national conversation on race and censored it at the same time. Tell us about, because I think for me, when I was reading your book, it was just hard to imagine that this outside entity would take a filmmaker's locked film and then re-edit it. We can't really conceive of that now, right? That would be unheard of, but it was fairly common at that time.
You mean the production code?
Yeah. Well, who was responsible for doing that censorship, and then just how did that work? Was that common, and was it always done around issues of race?
Very commonly. I mean, that's sort of what my book is focusing on is when the PCA and other censorship boards were focused on race, what they were looking at, what they were trying to prohibit or what they were afraid of. So, yeah, I mean, definitely with this film, I mean, they didn't necessarily go onto the sets and make any kind of commentary there. But they certainly did go through copious script drafts and try to get a sense of how to tone down something that might have to do with race riots, that might have to do with miscegenation, which is they saw as the sex relationship between black and white people. And that was explicitly prohibited in the production code. But there was a whole area that they called industry policy, which were just things that were supposed to make Hollywood look good from the outside. So they didn't want to offend business interests and those sorts of things. So a lot of race got determined by kind of white racist industry policy, right? The desire not to offend people who didn't want to see social equality between black and white. So that's a lot of what the book is covering is how the Production Code Administration handled that. And I mean, it's all because between the years of 1915 and 1952, films were not protected under the First Amendment. Mutual Decision of 1915 dictated that motion pictures were a business pure and simple. So there was no protection. So in order to protect itself, the Production Code Administration was created. Yeah.
Tell us about how you first came upon this idea in your research. I understand this was your doctoral dissertation. That was the foundation of the book. But take us back to when it sort of clicked in your head that you wanted to approach this subject.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was reading Stuart Hall's Encoding Decoding, where he really talks about the process that media goes through from production through various forms of censorship and then reception and then the sort of loop that exists there in terms of feedback. So the idea for me was really to look at a set of films through those processes and to understand the institutions that form the cinema. And those institutions include those we know about, the production institutions, the great producers, the great production companies, but also these many censorship mechanisms and, Black reception as a kind of important moral force on the cinema as well. And so part of what I argue, especially in my last chapter, is that through kind of stuttered signification like we see here, Black audiences and Black journalists in particular read these films in a way that drew out civil rights meanings, that drew out meanings around Black life, that the films were kind of dealing with in muted ways or indirectly. And that became a kind of basis for a certain kind of image-based civil rights politics.
Right. Yeah. I think people are always curious with writers, like about writing process. I know this is a film night, but tell us a little bit about how you approached writing the book and what was your time frame for finishing it.
So I approached it in terms of I really love researching. So going back into the archive after the dissertation was completed and kind of filling in details and sort of figuring out more. It's a really rich tapestry of a discourse about race in American cinema. And so just kind of drawing out elements that I hadn't seen before, growing the story into something that was significant. And so, that was a lot of my process. I wrote it over the course of a postdoc that I had at University of Pennsylvania. And so that was a lot of it. And, just going into the archive, which I love to do, was a big part of it too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We're going to open it up for questions from the audience. And, feel free to also share your reactions to the film. We can have kind of a discussion about how it landed for you all too, with Ellen's expertise giving us context. I want to go back to the fight scene because I just found it really striking, like what you said earlier about how, there was no actual bloodshed. Everything was sort of imagined, like, there's someone like, throwing an actual whip over
Mm-hmm.
like that felt very intentional, like to evoke a certain feeling, a whole set of images that they never had to actually show on the screen for us to understand what it meant. And I guess I wonder, like, how did you how should we understand this the scene, both where Lucky is talking to the black men before they, telling them a strategy before they go, and then the white men at the junkyard getting their, makeshift weapons together, and then the convergence of the two. Like, what stands out about it to you?
I just think it's so interesting that they decided to have this be a real moment where black men are standing up for themselves and just deciding we're not going to let this happen anymore. I think that's a really key decision in terms of the film's flow, and was probably in its moment pretty much strange, for this time. I think it's still very muted. I guess I really feel that. But I think it's really interesting how we go into the home and we hear from the mother saying, let him take his walk. And I think that's a real intentional moment. Again, veiled, what does that mean? It's a walk he's talking about. But we all sort of know where that's going. I mean, I actually, maybe the 15th time I saw this, I started to wonder about Dr. Brooks when he gets spit, when there's spit in his face and he wanders off, what's happening there? He's gone, pretty much for hours. We don't know what's happened. But I think it opens up the room for like Mr. Tibbs to start to come through in this portrayal.
Right.
Because I think there are quite a few moments in here where we start to see shades of that.
Mm-hmm.
Who
And you pointed out earlier that Lucky actually doesn't make it, right? Like, and how that feels significant too, like that they wanted us to see that he died, right? And he paid a cost for what he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. When we talked earlier, you asked about the end and, just the fact that Ray survives, right?
Right.
Even though he's this person who's used the N-word all these multiple times and has a certain amount
And
of...
has no reason to live.
Right.
And because no one loves him.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's a way in which it's quite an interesting choice on the part of the film, the filmmakers to allow him to live, but yeah, Lucky dies. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. And I guess I just I feel like we would be remiss if we just didn't talk about Sidney Poitier a little bit. Like, it's kind of incredible. I mean, just on a very basic level, it's like, oh my gosh, he's a baby, he's he literally looks like he's 18 years old, which is amazing. He was, you were talking earlier about Ana Lucasta. Some of you may know the story that, Harry Belafonte was cast in the lead in that play, and one night he couldn't make it and Sidney was his understudy. And the night that Sidney performed, the casting agent or someone came, and that's part of how he got this role, right? So, this was his first real like feature film, and I guess I just wonder what you think of the performance.
I think it's really layered and interesting. He must play this person who's insecure, which I think is sort of a flaw of the script.
Yeah.
Because, and a lot of Black reviewers talked about that. Why did he have to be so insecure as a character? But there's real rage in him here. And also that balancing act of wanting to be, a citizen within this culture, but also really trying to, to deal with the white racism coming his way. I mean, it's a beautiful performance in a lot of ways. There's just so many moments that he captures so well. And I think in a way he transcends, again, the role. That's sort of, trope in Black acting in classical Hollywood is the need to transcend the role, because the role is always limited in what it can do. But I think because we're seeing him in different spaces, there's actually more for him to do than there were for some earlier Black actors. And I just think it's really important to note that these were Black actors who were very well trained, which was not always, the studios had a way of just hiring people who were on the set or in the environment. If we think about the very first Black actors hired in Hollywood, a lot of them were, maids and butlers of Hollywood talent. Right. So the way that Black actors normally came into the system, this was really a different film in that sense. Yeah.
It was kind of a turning point. Okay. Well, does anyone have a question or a burning comment? And, okay. I can just call or Lauren, do you have mics? Oh, great. Okay. Let's go down here to, the gentleman in the middle. Down this way. Yes, you with the gray. Is it gray?
Yes.
Keep your hand up because she can't see you.
This is PhD student Justin Foster,
oh,
who
okay.
himself
Got
has
a ringer.
Wonderful reading of this film.
Firstly, just thank you so much, Dr. Scott, and for helping put this together. I've seen this movie many times, as you know, and there's always many different things that I extract from it. But I feel like one of the universal things of this movie, whether it's your first time seeing it or 10th time seeing it, is just how hateable Ray Biddle is as a character. And I was wondering if there is almost like an intentionality behind that for the censorship. Because you talked about how, the comfortability in which he says the N-word. And he really is framed as not just a racist character, but like a true sadistic, like evil, pathetic man. And I'm wondering if in a way, because he's so hyperbolic in his just evil, that creates a dissonance with the white viewer, where they don't view themselves as really having to interrogate their own racist biases, because the character who's racist on screen is so cartoonishly evil. So I'm just curious your thoughts on Ray Biddle and just how hyperbolic his characterization is.
I feel like it was hyperbolic until January 20th. And then I start to wonder what might be out there actually. But I do think at the time that was definitely one of the strategies in terms of censorship was we don't ever have to think about the everyday racism. We don't have to think about Jim Crow. We don't have to think about any of the things that are institutional. We can hear it in little moments, perhaps in the doctor's office or the head of the hospital saying we need to worry about this. But it's not really the main thing we're confronting in the film. What we're confronting is this sort of clownish, in a way, sort of over-the-top racism. And so I think that does defray some of the intensity of our own search for, or white folks' own search for an understanding of where they might be harboring some of this. It's just incredibly over the top. You're exactly right.
Thank you.
And it's also racism as a personal individual flaw versus a network of systems of oppression. Yeah.
And also as a kind of a diagnosable condition, right? I mean, there's a way in which it's framed in these really medical terms, in a sense. The film. Right. Yeah.
We're gonna go.
Sorry, it's okay.
Why don't you pick? Go ahead. These are your students, I see. Okay, yes. A teacher always has to pick on their students.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for this excellent event tonight. I kind of want to go off on a little bit of Justin's comment / question regarding Ray Biddle. Ray, in short, we see we just watched the film, he's figuratively, he's sick, mentally, there could be something going on, but he's also physically ill. Mm-hmm. We see towards the end of the film, this constant begging for, water as a form of nutrition, and he's ill, but he still wants to inflict violence upon Dr. Brooks, solely based on the fact of, his ethnicity. So my question to you is, do you think that Ray's, I guess I should say maybe his descent per se, could be an allegory for the perhaps self-destruction of racism in the film?
You mean that racism in some way taking over his body and, draining away his life force.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting reading and definitely one this film supports. I mean, what I think is interesting about this text is it supports a lot of different readings, and it also tries to operate on a metaphorical level through the language in the film, but also, again, through a lot of the signifiers we're seeing here. So I think we could certainly think about that. I don't know if it like tracks all the way through the film, you know what I mean? But there are moments certainly I think where that bears itself out. I mean, certainly at the ending. I don't know what kind of future he has. It seems he'll go to prison, right? And he'll live, but he'll live with this awareness of all that he's done and in a way of a state of constant punishment in a certain way. So that's a really nice reading, though. I think that's great.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, there's some people in the back who've had their hands up for a while in this middle section. There's a gentleman. Oh, good. Okay, here we go.
Hello, good evening. I think Ray, I have a comment and a question. I think Ray suffered a lot of childhood trauma, and I think he is bitter and angry, and he uses the racism as an excuse because his life hasn't been what he would have liked it to be, and it's gone into a psychotic state, number one. Number two, which is a lot of what's going on today. I don't see any different in what happened in this film than what's going on today, every day, all day, in certain situations. The other thing is you mentioned that, which I didn't see, that you felt that this was about the white working class. I didn't get any of that, so I would like for you to kind of expand on that. And then I missed what city was this depicted in?
I think
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for those questions. Yeah, I think they're particular to not mention the name of the city and to sort of have these neighborhoods have certain kinds of names like Beaver Canal, or, then the N word is used to describe one neighborhood. Yeah, I mean, I guess the reading I'm trying to draw out is Edie, right? Who's this figure who kind of is at the center of all of this. She's woven throughout the storyline. And I think we hear a lot more from Ray and others about their lives than we do about the Black characters in the film. And so there's a way in which, and this was part of how the studios wanted to handle race problems during this era, was to try to make it so that white people could identify with the film and with anti-racism at some level, right? Now it's not the anti-racism we know now. But a lot of what they were trying to do, we won't even go down that road. But yes. So, I think they're trying here to do a little bit of that, to have us identify with Edie and her initial, have white people reading it basically identify with Edie and her kind of interstitial state of being like, well, do I believe these this Black doctor, or do I believe the people I've come from? I just think we hear a lot more about Beaver Canal than we do about any of these other locations. So, it presents itself very much as being about race. And of course, we're watching, race riots unfold in a certain way. So I won't take that away at all from the plot. But I just think it would have been a really different film if we heard a lot more from Luther Brooks and from the rest of the family, which I think they deliberately played down.
I think we can take one more question.
Oh, I got so many. This is going to be fun.
Yes, I just want to be respectful to our staff here. That's the gentleman in the back there, yeah.
Well, first of all, thanks for sharing this with us. Very interesting, I found it. I have a comment very quick. I think the brother that survived, I didn't see the title sequence, but I think he was Richard Widmark.
Yes.
Yes.
Who became one of the biggest stars of the Western movies later on. But the other thing that was not discussed so far, this is probably the best example of an alliance between the Jews and blacks, from what I see at the time, because Jews obviously at that time had become lawyers and attorneys and judges and had some influence, and at the time blacks obviously faced restrictions and could not have that, but they had the numbers. So the alliance was formed that became the foundation later on of civil rights in the 60s. And also movies like that, I think, is products of those alliance. Can you talk about the significance of it and how it has changed in recent decades?
That's a really, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't see this one as much about that alliance, but there are a bunch of Hollywood films at this time. If we look at Tom Anderson has this term film gris that he uses to describe films that actually depict the lives of Jewish working class people and use the techniques of noir as a guise to really talk about capitalism and its problems. And in a number of those films, you do see that alliance really clearly. John Garfield is in a number of those, like Body and Soul is one, The Breaking Point is another. And I think these films really are essentially about that alliance. So they're really, really, I think, important in this moment. So that's one set. Yeah, I think in this film, you mean because of Dr. Wharton? Is that who you're seeing as a Jewish figure here?
Just look at the theme of the film. Most of the producers, directors, writers.
Mankiewicz and Zanuck. Yeah.
Yes, you can see it right away if you know the background and history, how it evolved. I think it's there.
Okay, yeah.
They don't see it, they don't say it background, but I can see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an important aspect of the film. In terms of this moment, there are a number of films, and I think this may be one of them. That's definitely an arguable point about that. Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I mean, it's a really important alliance throughout, the question of civil rights. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that a lot of our conversation centered around Biddle.
Yeah.
And I think that even though Sidney Poitier is, number one on the call sheet, probably in a lot of ways, because of the issues you've so eloquently described, like the movie kind of belongs to Biddle in the end, which is kind of sort of the point, but also not, kind of disappointing, right?
It's sort of unsatisfying, I think,
Yeah.
that we end with that focus on Biddle, return to his childhood, his
Right.
sort of way of thinking, and then he becomes sort of a metaphor for, where
Yeah.
America could go. I mean, I
Right.
think, it could have looked really different, I think, in some ways. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess you're only as strong as your weakest link. Any final thoughts before we go?
No, I think it was just great to be here with you guys tonight. Thanks for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming out. We appreciate you. Hope to see you again soon. Have a great night.